In this first video for section 5.5, quadratic functions, we're going to take a look at what quadratic functions are. And here's the basic definition. Quadratic functions are functions with the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So this kind of function should be familiar to you for a few reasons. Well, we talked about these way back in chapter 2. When we were talking about finding maximums and minimums of functions. And you probably also spent a lot of time talking about these in your algebra class back in high school. To get a better idea of how quadratic functions work and what they look like, we're going to look at the graphs of two quadratic functions in Desmos. So looking at the formula, let's compare y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Whenever you're looking at a quadratic function, these letters a, b, and c will usually be replaced by numbers. So here my first function is y equals 3x squared minus 5x plus 1. 3 is taking the place of a, minus 5 is taking the place of b, and 1 is taking the place of c. Here's my second quadratic function, y equals minus x squared minus 4x minus 4. In this one, minus 1 is taking the place of a, minus 4 is taking the place of b, and minus 4 is also taking the place of c. Let's head over to Desmos and look at the graphs of these two functions. So let's open up a tab with Desmos in our browser and click the Get Started Graphing button and start typing in one of our quadratics. Let's start with 3x squared minus 5x plus 1. And here's the graph that we get in red. There's a few important features that you should notice about the graph. First of all is that it has a minimum. So the graph is decreasing up to this point, reaches a minimum, and then begins increasing. And if you're using Desmos and you click on the function, it'll drop in a point exactly at the minimum. And here we can read it off. The x value is 0.833 and the y value is minus 1.083. And there's a few more points that have been placed. Let's look at these two next. Maybe zoom in a little bit. These 2 points are where the graph of our function crosses the x-axis. So these are known as the x-intercepts and sometimes also the zeros of the function. In your algebra class, you probably learned something called the quadratic formula or quadratic equation, and that's a method to find these 2 points by hand. Since you're going to be completing your homework on the computer though, we can just find these zeros in Desmos. And this is all you do. Just click on them. And then there's one other point that's highlighted over here. And this is the vertical intercept or y-intercept. This one is not as important for quadratic functions as it is for linear functions. Mostly we're going to be interested in these, the zeros or x-intercepts, and then this one down here, the minimum. Now let's type in the other quadratic. It was y equals minus x squared minus 4x minus 4. And we can go ahead and turn off the red graph and zoom out to see the next quadratic. So this one appears much different from the first one. We can see that the shape is like this. It has a peak. It begins increasing, reaches the peak, and then begins decreasing. And if we click on the function, we can see that the peak is highlighted at -2, 0. And you'll also notice that the peak is the same as the 0, the x-intercept of this particular quadratic function. So the two shapes that you saw in this video are the two general shapes for quadratic functions. They're either going to look like this one, where they have a maximum or a peak, or they're going to look like our red quadratic that had a minimum or a valley.